doing. For me, the positive things today are the people being increasingly vocal in calling out the degeneracy of the Republican Party, and also people being increasing numbers of people who are prepared to stand up and call out the weird sexuality teachings of evangelical Christians and how that often seems to be associated with people who commit crimes against others in relation to sexuality. So Josh Duga, who was arrested and held without bail for possessing child sex abuse material. That's a new term to adopt in case anybody is tempted to use the old terminology of child porn, which implies a degree of consent which shouldn't exist because it's statutory rape and just clearly very abusive. I can see the logic in asking people to use terminology that reinforces a message we need to drive home, that it's abusive of children. So Josh Duga did that. If you're not familiar with that name, he's one of the 19 and counting Duga family that have a whole bunch of children because they're part of a quiverful movement that don't believe in any form of contraception, to say nothing of obviously being anti-abortion. And Josh Duga was outed as having confessed to his family 3 times of abusing 4 of his younger sisters by touching them on their genitalia, on their erogenous zones while they were asleep and prepubescent, and that he was given a stern talking to and taken to see a police officer by the name of Joseph Hutchins, who is, I want to say coincidentally, but I'm not going to say coincidentally, because that man is serving a sentence for possessing child sex abuse material himself now. So it's not really a coincidence, is it, if he was a friend of the family police officer and he exhibits some of the same problems as the Dugar family. So Knowledge is here and says hello. Hello, Knowledge. Nice to see you. So what else did I want to say about Josh Dugar? I wanted to say, that because there was that scandal, people might not have heard of the other scandals the same week for evangelical communities. There's an American pastor who's resigned from the Hillsong megachurch conglomerate because of infidelity and unsolicited sharing of explicit photos of women. So similar to Matt Gaetz. And again, I'm drawing attention to some overlap between evangelical Christians and Republicans who, whilst not openly being evangelical Christians themselves, often feel themselves to be very connected to the agenda of evangelical Christian voters. So Matt Gaetz, and being implicated with his friends' written confession of crimes that they engaged in together with relation to the sex trafficking of women, including one woman under the legal age for sexual activity in Florida. So one 17-year-old. And the pretense that they didn't know she was under 18 as well, even though her handle on the website that they found her on was apparently vintage 99, indicative of her birth year. And in Joel Greenberg's statement that he wrote out to give to Roger Stone to be given to Donald Trump with the addition of a $250,000 payment via Bitcoin, Joel Greenberg wrote that he was very shocked to find out that this girl that he and Matt Gaetz had both had sexual relations with was 17 years old, and they castigated her for lying about her age and made her understand that she'd put people in a lot of danger. And then resumed seeing her again once some months had passed and she'd turned 18, and resumed paying her for sex. So Joel Greenberg presumably wrote that to make details appear as exculpatory as possible, but it doesn't really seem that exculpatory, and certainly Joel Greenberg didn't get the pardon from Donald Trump that he was hoping for. Frank's here and says hello from Los Angeles. Hello, Frank. So yes, I would just like to draw an arrow to the background here, because what I'm hoping is the more we discuss these things, the less inclined we become, collectively speaking, to falsely associate benign human kindness with evangelical Christianity, with Christian fundamentalism of any description, because they need to be looked at more warily. Their ethos, their philosophy is often associated with sex crimes and not with benevolence. Not only sex crimes, but also persecution of minority groups and people whose gender is relatively more fluid and whose sexual preferences are not closely aligned with the doctrine of the quiverful movements or evangelical Christian movements or fundamentalist Christian movements. So, yeah, the right-wing Christians. I'm sure there are many left-wing Christians who are much more open in their embrace of tolerance and acceptance of others and embracing the human worth of other people, regardless of whether or not they're heterosexual. The acknowledgement of the humanity and human worth of people whose preferences do not adhere to the more rigid constructs previously asserted as supremely worthy by sort of white supremacist Christianity. All right, let's have a look at Joy-Ann Reid, because I did promise to have a look at that, because she did something admirable, which is full-throated denunciation of Tucker Carlson and the type of white supremacy that he advocates. And she also mocked him, which sometimes my own personal jury is out on whether or not it's useful to mock people, but overall, I feel inclined to heartily endorse the idea of mocking people as a way to diminish their power and the influence they have over a society. So mocking Tucker Carlson to diminish his nihilistic, white supremacist, fascist ethos on everybody else. So here we go with Joy-Ann, and that's going to be a substantial clip of about 4 minutes. I haven't heard it all myself yet. I've heard 1 minute, but I'm happy to consume it with you all and rejoice in it, because to me, this is the path forwards. And I know there's sometimes a lot of hesitancy to do anything other than appear reasonable or bipartisan. So we only sometimes want to go after the most low-hanging fruits of the most obviously racist, terrible people. So Donald Trump gave people permission to be critical of the Republican Party, and they lapped it up to say, yes, feed the antagonism, feed the adversarial gamesmanship idea so that we can try and harvest people who have a preference for politics being unobtrusive and not adversarial and not contentious in any way, shape, or form. But it didn't work out for them because Donald Trump was so terrible and so untethered from reality. And that was brought into contrast, such sharp contrast, by the coronavirus, where Trump was clearly changing his position, moving from dismissing coronavirus as being not a substantial threat to the public to then saying it's a big threat, we're on a war footing, and we're at war with China, who has purposefully inflicted this on us. And that's why we're at war, and I'm a war president, and you don't vote out a president when you're in the middle of a war, do you? So he had a lot of contradictory stances on COVID, which I think helped impress on some white Republicans who are college educated that that's not a position of intellectual integrity. So even if they were caught up in the disinformation cycles perpetuated by Fox News and OAN and Newsmax, for those that had relatively less exposure to the brainwashing magic of that particular media bubble, they had questions. They had questions about COVID. Some white men, Republican men, had questions about COVID, and I think the Lincoln Project and the Midas brothers helped make videos that really encapsulated the logical inconsistencies of Trump and how he was not doing a good job as president, and how that kind of highlights the weaknesses in the Republican argument that less government is better government, because Donald Trump clearly failed the American people and failed to use the mechanisms of government appropriately to serve and protect Americans from a common enemy we share, that is to say, virus particles that can kill us and leave us with long-lasting disabilities. So Knowledge El-Shabazz just gave me a high five award. Thanks, Knowledge. High five. I'm going to press play and listen to Joy for a bit.
So just for the record, I don't spend a lot of time watching Fox News, or the BS Factory, as CNN's Jim Acosta more colorfully dubbed them this weekend. Personally, I prefer my news and information to be grounded in reality rather than monetizing my amygdala to keep me on edge and buying my pillows in gold. However, according to Media Matters, The Root, Crooks and Liars, and others who watch Fox News so you don't have to, at least 3 times in the last month, well, Tucker Carlson took time off from badgering strangers in parks and bouncy houses to demand that they show him their children's unmasked faces, to refer to moi as the race lady. The race lady. Why would they call me that? I mean, I used to run track in high school, but I mean, honestly, I'm not that fast. So what else could it be? What else?
Watch The Race Lady on MSNBC. Harvard educated but totally oppressed and absurdly racist claims, says the race lady from Harvard. Joy Reid, the race lady over at MSNBC. Here's the race lady from MSNBC finally putting her Harvard degree to work. Oh, wait a second, Harvard educated race lady? Now you're really confusing us. Well, Joy Reid, the race lady over on MSNBC, took a quick break from haranguing Whitey yesterday.
Did he say Whitey? Oh, honey, Tuckums. Is this really about me fixating on race, or is it about you fixating on race? I mean, when you recently went off on me for continuing to mask up post-vaccine while jogging in crowded Central Park, you weirdly, as you did in that montage, threw in my attending Harvard. Now, I don't know, maybe I'm sensitive to this stuff, but it felt kind of like a dog whistle. I mean, did you want to go to Harvard? Did they reject you? And you think, oh yeah, they let the race lady in, blah, affirmative action, blah. Well, listen, let me cheer you up, okay? I got into Harvard and Yale, Vassar, and the University of Denver too, because I had a really high GPA and fantastic SAT scores. And that's how affirmative action works, love. Schools search for smart people from diverse backgrounds so that these schools won't be as dry as all the major sports leagues were before they desegregated. See? And just because, maybe you didn't have great grades and great test scores and needed your girlfriend's daddy to help you get into college doesn't mean that you don't have amazing people in your life who love you. I mean, you got all that Swanson money, right? Bitch sticks for everybody. Woo. And, you had fun at Trinity after, you got bought in, right? By the way, what was the Dan White Society? You know what? Moving on. And just because the CIA rejected your application, I mean, look, things turned out fine for you. You had a great career over here at MSNBC. Oh, actually, okay, that didn't work out. Well, look, you were great on CNN, though, until Jon Stewart kind of humiliated you. But it's fine. You're fine. Things are going great for you. And back to the whole race thing, just saying, I'm not the one who spools out over my neighborhood changing like I'm some segregationist housewife from the 1950s. That would be you, Tuckums. And I'm not the one spouting a conspiracy theory that white people are going to be replaced by a Democratic Party conspiracy to import non-white people to outnumber them, a theory that was also mouthed by the Charlottesville Tiki Torch Nazis. That would also be you. And the reason I continue to mask up in crowded places is because I don't know how many people in those crowds that I'm jogging around didn't hear about the court case where your bosses said that your show isn't news. So they listen to you like you are the news. And I don't trust that people who listen to you, Tuckums, are taking precautions against COVID rather than freaking out about a piece of cloth and busting into the Target to cough on all the cereal boxes like they're 17th century colonizers touting measles blankets with them. People like you and your friends and the BS Factory are keeping us steeped in COVID sickness and rage and paranoia. And the ways in which you, Lil Tucker, are making America worse are why I will continue to keep my mask on in a crowd. And we'll have more on your endless COVID hell that the Tuckers of our country, who, by the way, are the absolute worst, are helping to create.
Wow, how cool was that? It's not just that she used humor. It's not just that she savaged Tucker Carlson in a way that Tucker Carlson tries to use humor to feed the egos of his listeners. She outed him, and she called out the movement from the far right, which is that they are prolonging the pandemic. They are weakening the likelihood that America can reach herd immunity, even with its stellar vaccination rollout programs. They are sabotaging American health. They are complicit in the death and disability of hundreds of thousands of Americans. Definitely many people on Fox are complicit in that, because not only have they been arguing against vaccinations, but prior to that, they were arguing against mask wearing, which they continue to do. And they were advocating against taking COVID seriously, and they were advocating for, so they're advocating against taking COVID seriously and advocating for hydroxychloroquine when it was unproven, and continuing to advocate for hydroxychloroquine even when it was established that it potentially increased heart arrhythmias, so dysfunctions of the heart. And that's something they did to Americans. They used their clout, their influence, their profile to sicken and weaken Americans, and they were paid very well to do that. And it might be inexplicable to some people what their agenda could possibly be in doing it, but it's because the fuel of that political party is contrarianism. It's feelings over facts, and they want politics, instead of being about policy, and debates over policy, to be about an emotional reaction to value statements from certain politicians. So Republican politicians get to say, we value hard work and independence, and Democrats don't. There's no evidence of that. It's not that Democratic policies support low independence. They just support helping people get on their feet. But it's always portrayed by Republicans as being emotionally indulgent. And the nugget of truth that supports Fox News and all of the conservative media outlets that argue Democrats and progressives and liberals are all emotionally loose, wayward individuals, is that modernity does, or the pendulum, the emotional pendulum of the current climate, does put a lot of emphasis on emotions and being authentic. So that's supposed to be being authentic and acknowledging America's history of white terrorism against Black people and Native Americans. That's supposed to be the honesty and the authenticity, but some young people are castigated sometimes as buying into a culture where they say, my feelings are important. It's not so much my employer's needs that are important, it's I've got to be true to my feelings, and I don't feel like doing that right now. I feel like that's too hard. So that's the Republican concern, that modernity has bred an indulged culture of children and who've grown up to be young adults and middle-aged adults even, who don't believe in hard work or independence or pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, which may have a kernel of truth at an emotional level, but more broadly speaking, the bootstraps argument is rubbish, because they're using that to deflect from the reality that Black Americans were denied boots, not only during the period of slavery, but the boots they'd acquired for themselves were often stolen from them when Reconstruction came to an end, was compromised away after the contentious election of 1876. And then people said, okay, we'll end the Reconstruction period, we'll withdraw federal troops from Confederate states so you can once again be free to ramp up your persecution of Black Americans, and if not actively re-enslave them, instead deter them from gaining political power by lynching people who have the audacity to try and vote and participate in American democracy, who have the audacity to reach for power by exercising the ideals of American democracy and running for office and voting and all of that democratic participation stuff, which became a focal point of Confederate terror post-Civil War, which became a focal point of Confederate revenge against Black Americans for having existed in a way that that Confederate supporters were then somehow tricked into going to war to be able to continue to enslave. Black Americans were the subject of the ire of Confederates who had lost the war and who had lost their gamble on continuing on a continuance of permission to enslave and exploit and steal from Black Americans. Oh, that's nice. Frank says, I appreciate that Dav sets up context before tossing clips up to enrage everyone. It serves to create rational thinking regardless of your particular point of view. Everyone has a unique point of view, true, and this is constructive for constructive thought. Why, thank you, Frank. That's a beautiful contribution. I do think it's important to contextualize clips and to broaden the context in which we view them so that we don't just watch clips as team sport participants, as an audience for a team sport, that we don't just cheer on people calling out Tucker Carlson, but we understand that there's an opportunity to call people in to acknowledging the forces at play and what might motivate Tucker Carlson. Joanne Reid noted that Tucker Carlson was married the heiress of a frozen foods empire, the Swanson Empire. So she made a throwaway reference to fish sticks for everyone. And of course, if that was true of Joanne Reid, Tucker Carlson would have made reference to that every day for years, that his rival had made money from frozen fish sticks, because it does sound funny, actually, and Tucker Carlson thrives from that humor. He's the conservative version of Jon Stewart in that he doesn't try to produce sober, serious news content. He's trying to entertain, but he's still using sarcasm and funny faces and, goodness gracious, emphasis and drama to try and act as if the reality he's suggesting exists is supported by the facts. He is giving dramatic emphasis to his supposedly factual reporting, but what is effectively white supremacist slanted reporting. And it's very slanted to continue to call Joanne Reid the race lady, to continue to pretend that COVID isn't serious, that COVID doesn't require wearing masks in communal settings, ignoring the disproportionate way that COVID has harmed Black communities in the US and Hispanic communities. I should say populations, because America's America. There's diverse populations. People are mixed in with each other. There's just some communities that are strongly demographically Black. And that racial composition of certain communities has given Republicans often an excuse to sabotage access to the polls, to have restricted numbers of polling booths so that Black Americans have this poll tax on their time. And I believe it's the 14th Amendment that says 24th Amendment that says poll taxes should be illegal, that it's illegal to try and restrict people's access to voting by compelling them to pay money. And instead, Black Americans have to pay with their time, which is worth significant amounts of money, by waiting in polls for 5 hours or 10 or 12 hours, and knowing that that's part of the legacy of white supremacist opposition to Black participation in political power structures in the US, that's part of the white supremacist gambit of denying Black voters the opportunity to vote for people who will legislate to serve their community's interests. Christopher's here and says hi, and says that I'm a superb educator. Thank you, Christopher. I have been brainstorming as to how I could enhance the educative potential of these broadcasts, and I was trying to think of ways in which I could sing the news to marry my interest in singing and my interest in delivering information, but I think I might just have to stick to talking. And unlike Joy Reid, I have not been educated at Harvard or Yale or the University of Denver, or even educated at all in the United States. So I know on one hand I'm at a disadvantage if I want to compete in a infotainment, newstainment arena, but at the same time, I still bring a different advantage to the table, even with those disadvantages. Well, that lack of checkbox qualifications of Ivy League education, I still bring novelty to the table, and that I'm interested in learning about America, along with a lot of people who I think are interested in learning more than what they were taught in school or even university. So I'm keen to be on this journey and bring people along with me. So I hope that willingness to learn is a tick in my qualification column. So thank you, Christopher, and thank you, Knowledge El Shabazz, as well as Frank. Knowledge just gave me a Super Heart Award. Thank you, sir. Much appreciated. The next part of the news that I wanted to report on. Oh, wow, somebody else stuffed Tucker Carlson right into a locker. How many seconds is this?
Around 30%.
2 minutes. Okay, we're gonna just follow up. Joyanne stuffing Tucker Carlson in a lawyer, or Tuckums, as she called him, by watching John Oliver do the same. And this is good for people to step up. It's good. Even when people complain, oh no, it means America's becoming divided. We don't always have to pursue unity at the cost of Black-friendly perspectives. We don't always have to compromise to the agenda of white supremacists such as Tucker Carlson, white supremacists who seek to deny the contribution of migrants to the United States, who seek to deride the contribution of Black Americans to the United States, who want to maintain a status quo of people remaining relatively unaware of the various riots that have occurred when white people have attacked Black communities, the various injustices that have occurred and the repercussions of which continue to reverberate in the present, namely the denial of returning GI Black veterans of the opportunities to get a government-backed mortgage and other benefits that were made available to white returning GIs, white service members returning from World War II. Benefits that helped establish significant patterns of intergenerational wealth establishment for white families, and that was denied to Black families. So the consequences of those actions, whilst they were initiated in the past, as I said, they continue to reverberate today in a very consequential manner. And as we've seen with COVID, intergenerational wealth is a life or death matter when you lack access to healthcare. You lack access to the type of education that can give you access to a good job in which your healthcare is secretly subsidized by the government, because ostensibly it's subsidized by a corporation, and people say, yes, this is just part of America's capitalism, that corporations pay for your healthcare if you're good enough to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and get one of those good jobs. But it's not discussed as much that corporations have those healthcare insurance payments made 100% tax deductible, which means the broad taxpayer base is subsidizing the healthcare of the people with the good jobs, and failing to acknowledge that there are often gatekeepers to those good jobs who act in very specific ways to exclude Black people, who have been proven to disproportionately discard the resumes of Black candidates when research has been conducted by human resources psychologists in universities who've conducted experiments in which they've sent out resumes that are identical, but just with one key difference of either a white sounding name or a black sounding name at the top of the resume, and found that the white named resumes advanced to a request for an interview, and the black sounding resumes, even though they were identical apart from the name, were clearly discarded and did not receive, or disproportionately did not receive, a request for a follow-up interview. So these are critical things to America, and Tucker Carlson works hard to deny that. I'm going to listen to John Oliver now and just express a wish that maybe I could work for John Oliver in helping to create pieces like this. So I should probably watch John Oliver more and seek to emulate that style, because it is newstainment. It is using clips and using data with comedic emphasis to be additionally persuasive. Because yes, the comedy draws in more audience, but that sense of inclusion and camaraderie is a product of the humor and the humorous tone and the sarcasm and the superiority that goes in on that type of presentation, being in on the joke. So Tucker Carlson is selling superiority through use of humor. It's a vicious, evil humor with targets of Black presenters such as Joy Reid. He's called migrants dirty. He's undermined public health by falsely maligning vaccines, and in fact, regularly and dependably undermining public health spokespeople such as Dr. Fauci, and public health measures such as mask wearing and choosing to accept a vaccine, etc. Phil notes that an Ivy League education is perhaps not important in broadcasting, and that Brian Williams doesn't even have a degree. Oh, wow, he doesn't even have a degree. That's cool. And Brian Williams is certainly notorious for occasionally introducing a snide remark as well, or a sarcastic, hard to read, unless you're familiar with him, remark that is sort of a poker face dig at people. So that's good. So maybe if I just keep cultivating wit, I'm not always good at it, but I can pull faces like Tucker Carlson. I think I have to acknowledge that's a powerful motivator for me. I knew that Tomi Lahren was just a blonde lady, white lady who talked to people and wasn't necessarily particularly well educated, but she invited her audience in to be supercilious towards the left. And she's like, oh, I have to own a gun. Here's a picture of me looking sexy with my gun down my yoga pants. And, off the left, they think they're so great, but really they're so terrible. Laugh with me, guys. And that sexy whiteness brought in an audience of people who already had a predilection for agreeing with those types of racist, pro-gun, pro-legitimate Americans are white and Christian type of worldview, so that she could make an income from that and increase the amount of validated racism out there. And I wanted to do the exact opposite. Like if Tomi Lahren has the confidence to front up to a camera and just talk in an inviting, welcoming way, but to promote bad things, then I will front up to that, a camera on my own, and do the same thing. I'm not blonde or as thin as Tomi Lahren, but I can work on that. John Smith is here and says hello from Chicago. Hello, John Smith. Frank is asking specifically, who is that reference again, Dav? Could you clarify what you're referring to, Frank, and I'll try and clear it up, whatever it is. In the meantime, here is John Oliver.
Around 30% of Republicans say they won't get it. And it's not hard to see why. Because fears and doubts about the vaccine have flown around conservative media, with one of the most prominent super spreaders being this fucking guy.
What about this vaccine? Why are Americans being discouraged from asking simple, straightforward questions about it? Questions like, how effective are these drugs? Are they safe? Do you need a reason to turn on the vaccine? And what happens if you do turn it down? Will you be allowed to fly on airplanes? or go to work, or enter the front doors of Madison Square Garden? Oh, now they're telling us the vaccine has a delayed response. Okay, delayed by how long? They don't say. If vaccines work, why are vaccinated people still banned from living normal lives? Honestly, what's the answer to that? So maybe it doesn't work and they're simply not telling you that. Well, you hate to think that, especially if you've gotten 2 shots. But what's the other potential explanation?
Okay, it is genuinely weird to see someone hosting a show on a supposed news network and ending every sentence with a question mark, especially when answers to most of those questions are out there for anyone who cares to know. So, for instance, that last complaint that the CDC still recommends wearing masks indoors when around vulnerable, unvaccinated people does not mean the vaccine doesn't work. Clinical trials found that the vaccines are spectacularly successful at preventing people from getting serious disease. As for whether they protect you from spreading the virus, the trials weren't designed to assess that, but evidence so far indicates that they drastically reduce transmission. The reason we still see mask and distancing recommendations is that the CDC is being cautious and wants to be sure that it is not spreading bullshit around during a global pandemic like a frozen dinner duke with a TV show. Anyway, I hope that answers at least one of your gape-mouthed bad faith wonderings, Tucker, you scrunch-faced fear baboon. And the problem is, when people like Tucker raise questions without bothering to answer them, there is a lot of misinformation out there for people to then stumble on.
Okay, so he called out Tucker Carlson for asking questions. Yes, that's one of the insidious ways in which they promote disinformation to try and undermine public knowledge. It's supposed to be public knowledge that the vaccines prevent serious disease, and that it's still slightly a question mark as to how much they prevent transmission. But the emerging evidence, say from Israel, shows where there's high vaccination rates, transmission drastically falls. And yesterday I was talking about statistics from different age demographics across various American counties, indicate that for those age demographics that were vaccinated as a priority, the 70 to 80, the 80 to 90 folk, that transmission rates in those age groups have dramatically fallen. And it's the younger age groups where transmission is rising, and indicating that we need to persuade young, healthy people not to listen to Tucker Carlson and to get vaccinated, and to continue to highlight those stories which show that even healthy people, even marathon athletes, even fitness coaches and CrossFit enthusiasts have still contracted COVID, and some of them have died, and some of them have been left requiring lung transplants or with significant mental fog and inability to work a full-time job because of high levels of fatigue and reduced lung functioning, more arrhythmic heart rhythms, just problems, reduced kidney function. I think I had a graphic the other day of the dominance of certain types of long-haul COVID syndrome. And I think some of the mental symptoms were the most prevalent. So mental fog and fatigue. So Marsh is here and says, hello. Frank, I've answered your question, so that's excellent. And John Smith gave a high 5. Thank you, John Smith. Frank notes that there was a headline in the New York Times which was significant to him. I respect the writer who wrote that piece, and she noted that experts are beginning to have some concerns that herd immunity will not be reached, that America won't get to the level of vaccination for it to be possible to eliminate COVID, a COVID zero approach. But it is true still that with relatively high levels of vaccination, you can still have a significant drop. So yes, it means Republican oppositional defiance disorder, Republican baked in contrarianism that Donald Trump instigated and and perpetuated and amplified, and that all his Republican cronies participated in to a degree, that is something that is still reverberating in America, that the legacy of that means there are high non-compliance rates amongst Republicans, and that is sabotaging health outcomes. That's imprisoning people with high levels of comorbidities who will be rationally fearful of getting COVID because it will still be circulating around their communities, and they know to contract it is at least fairly likely to be a death sentence or a severe disability sentence for them. So Republican reluctance to get the vaccine and Republican stubbornness around listening to public health officials. There's probably a way to keep calling them out for it in a way that best encourages responsibility. So what I might do now is go to Twitter, because there is a Republican-affiliated chap, pollster Frank Luntz. I've got Frank Luntz. Tucker Carlson hates him because he is doing important work conducting focus groups with Republicans who are vaccine hesitant. So we're going to listen to a 2-minute 18 clip of those people in his focus group. He's exposed them to information from doctors, and doctors who I think were on the Zoom calls to answer their questions in a live sense. And he asked participants if their minds had been changed at all by what they'd just heard, and all of them said they were now more likely to get the COVID vaccine. So he said, the participants said, one quote is that I liked the doctors and when they talked to us without any politics involved. So basically there are ways to try and circumvent the partisan poison that Donald Trump introduced into the public arena. You can try and emphasize doctors and that information is being delivered by doctors and that it's just purely public health information. And we don't at least have Donald Trump on Twitter anymore, and we don't have him on the podium anymore, continuing to poke people's trust in health professionals, because he said terrible things about Dr. Fauci, and particularly after leaving office, that Dr. Fauci was just trying to hurt him. Yes. Frank is asking everyone to get vaccinated, and when it mutates, which it surely will, please get the next one. Yes, because when you can't pursue zero COVID and you're going to have still COVID circulating in communities, that's having host bodies for the virus is called having opportunities for the virus to mutate, the virus to find some people with a degree of immunity and to have avenues to say, well, I'm still here, so I'm going to find a workaround. I'm granting anthropomorphic intent to a virus, but a virus, like a liquid, will just find places to drain into. That's how life evolves. It doesn't have to be at the behest of a creator. It's just called life finding a way. And if you don't stamp out the virus, then it's there and it's going to mutate and it's going to find ways to remain in communities. Okay, so Marsha's keen to hear this. Oops, not that button. Pardon me. Here we go. This is 2 minutes and 20 seconds.
How has your opinion changed about the vaccine, if at all? How likely were you to get it when you started this session 2 hours ago? And how likely you are now? And please, I want to know the moment if your opinion changed. I want to know the one fact, the one story, the one reason why your opinion may be different now than what it was 1 hour or 2 hours ago. So Jen from Iowa, I'm going to start with you.
So I think my opinion has changed. Before I would have said I was in the middle of the fence on whether or not I would get the vaccination. And now I'm leaning a little more towards getting the vaccination. So I probably went from a 5 out of 10 to maybe a 7 out of 10 towards leaning that way. For me, I think the most impactful part was just listening to Dr. Friedman, talk about some of the logistics and like when they were making the vaccine and some of the background information on it that I don't believe had been shared enough with us as Americans. And for me, that was probably the biggest turning point for me.
I would say I was probably 80% against when this started today. Now I'm probably 50-50-ish. Between the numbers that Dr. Friedman gave and honestly the story that Dr. Christie gave about a healthy adult that ended up passing away from it, it really has made me think a little bit.
I would say I was 50-50 when we started. I'm maybe 75 in favor now of getting it, only if it means I can get into the nursing home to see my mother. That would probably push me a lot quicker. I like the doctors. I like the medical situation when they give us the facts and talk to us without any politics involved. I think that helps me see that my bias was probably with the political side of it, getting involved in just separating the medical side of it. If I can look just at the medical and health side of it, I'm much better off than when they mix politics in with it.
Okay. All right. So that was, I realized I actually had played that before on a previous day, and that coincidentally, Frank Luntz is trending right now because Tucker is criticizing him once again and has run with a story tonight saying that House GOP leader, the GOP minority leader, Kevin McCarthy, rents a room from Frank Luntz in DC. So they're treating this as scandalous, I guess, but Frank Luntz is quite a famous Republican pollster. So it's not as if it's a secret, but yes, apparently it wasn't known that Kevin McCarthy specifically rents a room from Frank Luntz. And so what this says to me is that the Republican Party has a problem. That the Republican Party has a problem with Tucker Carlson trying to divide them, to turn their anti-establishment feelings towards part of the Republican Party. So I guess Tucker Carlson wants to say there are good Republicans who are still pro-Trump, and then there are bad Republicans like Kevin McCarthy and Frank Luntz. So should we listen to maybe we'll listen to what Tucker Carlson has to say a little bit. This is him bitching about Frank Luntz, who is the man whose voice you heard asking those participants why they are interested in taking the vaccine. And I think it's worthwhile listening to see how white supremacist figures like Tucker Carlson are trying to divide the Republican Party into pro-vaccination and anti-vaccination. Because if you're pro-vaccination, then you're pro-Fauci and the Democrats. And if you're anti-vaccination, then you're pro-Trump and pro-Tucker. So I don't think that will serve them very well. Don't you need unity? Don't you need to be additive as a political party to succeed? I mean, their attempts at running a coup failed, and I'm personally less afraid now that the Republican Party will succeed, at least in the short term, of overthrowing democracy in the US. They no longer have Trump in charge, and Senator Dick Durbin is questioning FBI Director Christopher Wray. Why didn't the FBI have better intelligence on the insurrection if, as we now know, they have various Proud Boy informants? So people are asking good questions. There's an interest being taken in levels of complicity within parts of government that may still have some sympathies towards Trump or sympathies towards the Republican Party. Why wasn't more done to prepare the Capitol? Why was the Capitol extremely underprepared? Less prepared than it would normally be just for a straight out uncontroversial State of the Union address. So John Smith is saying that Frank Luntz, Romney, and Liz Cheney have all been outranked. Oh, and Frank Lentz wants to let us know that he's not Frank Luntz. Yes, well, I'm trying to keep the vocal distinction clear, Frank Lentz. If I slip up, let me know. And yes, well, with John Smith, with regards to your comment, they might have been outflanked in a way, but Romney still won a challenge at the meeting of Republicans. It was something like 728 to 711, and the 728 was to keep Romney and not oust him. So they're still defeating the people who are trying to get rid of them. So I would say there's an attempt to outflank them, but they still exercise a degree of influence in the Republican Party. Even though people booed Mitt Romney at that speech, an organizer still came forward to ask the crowd not to boo him, and that organizer also received applause. So I think we can say there's a significant rift in the Republican Party, and that, yes, the plurality of Republican voters probably sympathize with the pro-Trump, anti-Mitt Romney, anti-Liz Cheney side. Marsha says, I don't think they know how to get their party back together. Good point.
Once lobbies, he's not a registered lobbyist, but he lobbies on behalf of some of the world's most left-wing corporations. A lot of people do that. Here's the interesting thing about Frank Luntz. At the same time he's doing that, he also advises the leadership of the Republican Party. So Frank Luntz works for Google and Nike and Delta Airlines, among many others. Several years ago, Frank Luntz advised the makers of OxyContin on how to blame rural Americans as thousands of young people in rural America drop dead of opioid ODs. Frank Luntz did that. So he's not someone that normal people would go to for advice. And if you were running the Republican Party, you definitely wouldn't, because Frank Luntz is effectively a Democrat. We know this because we've listened to him. Now, Luntz typically launders his own opinions through the pseudoscientific focus groups that he conducts. But in real life, his views, make no mistake, bear no resemblance whatsoever to the views of actual Republican voters. So again, the question is, how did someone like this wind up with so much influence in the Republican Party? Why do Republican officials listen more carefully to Frank Luntz than they listen to their own voters? That is a mystery. A lot of people have asked that question in Washington. And as of 3 days ago, here was our best guess for why. So why does Frank Luntz remain a fixture in Republican politics at a time when the companies he works for are opposed to the Republican Party, explicitly so? Well, in part because he is particularly close to the House Minority Leader, Kevin McCarthy of California, and has been since McCarthy entered politics. In an interview earlier this year, Luntz described Kevin McCarthy as a personal friend. And that relationship gives Frank Luntz outsized influence over the Republican Party's policy positions. So Luntz is a personal friend of Kevin McCarthy's, who's the top-ranking Republican in the House. That's what we said. Turns out we didn't know the half of it. Over the weekend, we got a call from a source who said that, in fact, Frank Luntz and Kevin McCarthy are not simply friends, they're roommates. Kevin McCarthy lives in Frank Luntz's apartment in downtown Washington. That's what we were told. And honestly, we did not believe it. The top Republican in the House lives with a Google lobbyist? Come on. Even by the sleazy and corrupt standards of politics in Washington, that did not seem possible. In fact, it sounded like a joke. But this morning, since we heard it, we called to check with Kevin McCarthy's spokeswoman. And when we raised this, she all but chuckled at the suggestion. No. When he's in Washington, she told us, Kevin McCarthy rents hotel rooms or sleeps in his office in the Capitol. He certainly isn't living with Frank Luntz. Okay, and that seemed logical to us. But we did press a little bit because we got the tip from someone we consider reliable, and we just wanted to be sure. So the spokeswoman said she would get back to us. 2 hours later, we got this text, quote, following up on our conversation from earlier today. Because of the pandemic, McCarthy has rented a room in Washington at a fair market price from Frank Luntz. So actually, the top Republican in the House does live with someone who lobbies for Google. Mystery solved. Not only are they friends, they're roommates. So now you know why they listen to Frank Luntz, but they don't listen to you. No matter how cynical you become lately watching Washington, that's still a pretty remarkable thing to learn. But other questions remain. For example, what did the coronavirus pandemic have to do with Kevin McCarthy's choice of apartments? The Chinese unleash a virus on the world, and all of a sudden congressional leaders have to live with Frank Luntz? Was there CDC guidance on that? If so, we missed it. If anything, COVID increased the number of housing options in Washington, D.C. In some places, apartment prices fell, but not in Frank Luntz's building. Frank Luntz lives in one of the most expensive buildings in Washington. We pulled the deed and we checked. The estimate that we found shows that Luntz's condo in the fashionable Penn Quarter part of the city would likely rent for over $5,000 a month. That's the, quote, fair market price. So the question is Kevin McCarthy paying $5,000 every month to Frank Luntz to live in his house? We would love to know the answer. We asked several times of his office and no one got back to us with an answer. If Kevin McCarthy isn't paying market price, he is likely violating House ethics rules on taking gifts. And someday, we have no doubt, we will find out exactly what he is paying. But no matter what he's paying, as far as we're concerned, the price of the apartment is not the crime here. Kevin McCarthy's real crime is mocking his voters. Kevin McCarthy promises Republicans he shares their values. He tells them he's on their side. He says that he will fight for them against permanent Washington, the forces that would like to destroy their lives. Voters believe Kevin McCarthy when he says this. They send him back to office every 2 years. They send him money. And at the end of the day, Kevin McCarthy goes home to Frank Luntz's apartment in Penn Quarter, and he laughs about it.
All right.
Well, a remarkable story crossing today. CNN, of all places, reporting that the Biden administration will use private groups to spy.
All right. Well, that was extraordinary. Maybe people would have enjoyed that more if I just researched it quietly by myself and didn't inflict Tucker Carlson. But I'd like to encourage people to tolerate brief exposures, even brief with a broad definition of up to 5 minutes, to Tucker Carlson, because the see no evil approach does not work with modern American fascism. And I can draw a chronology of its popularity to say, don't look at them, don't feed the trolls. They talked smack about Obama during his tenure as president, and white liberal America tried to ignore what was happening on Fox News. Oh, they're so silly. Oh, they're so ridiculous and so hypocritical, and they pull at Obama about tan suits and mustard and ridiculous things. But the racism was festering and building up to a very severe backlash. The Tea Party and their claims to care about the debt, those went relatively unchallenged because people didn't listen to Fox and people didn't pay attention to what they were saying. People didn't position themselves well enough to be making counter arguments loudly and persuasively. And yes, using humor and using all the available tools to counter this very strong, pervasive force of white backlash against something that was painful and cognitively dissonant for large swathes of white America, having a black man as the highest ranking official in the land, a black man in a position of power and superiority. Yes, John Smith notes that unfortunately, because so many people listen to this racist every night, we all need to be aware of what's being said. Yes, John, I completely agree with you on that. Frank says, I think I know now why I'm on so many cell phone cold call lists. Interesting. Frank notes that it's phonetically making him laugh that his name is similar to the Frank Luntz, and that is a name that's now trending on Twitter, or at least was briefly. Yes, so vigilance is really important. With Obama elected, there was a temptation for so many to describe America as post-racial and to hush people trying to draw attention to ongoing issues of racial inequity and injustice, because they were told to be quiet, don't rock the boat. We're essentially in a post-racial America, and if Obama is president, how clearly we've moved past all manner of racially fueled injustice. So that was a big put down and a big suppressive cultural force against Black people who wanted to still draw people's attention to ongoing and even escalating patterns of injustice and persecution. Marsha says, I also believe in checking out what is going on with Fox. This helped me understand what my patients were saying. Oh, Marsha, remind me what your profession was. Clearly, health profession. Remind me what was your career. That's so exciting. I am always excited to chat to health professionals as well, because being a health professional means you have to practice a degree of tolerance. So I want to find that happy medium between the compulsion to practice tolerance, or not the compulsion, the pull to practice tolerance and allowing people to indulge in their opinions, but also what is the line where decent people will have to stand up for the sake of their country and say, oh, at this moment or in this forum, I am not going to sit quietly back while people amplify disinformation and amplify hate rhetoric. Podiatrist, okay. So you would talk to your patients for half an hour, and it helped you to know what was going on with Fox, because yes, I once performed at a nursing home with a group of Girl Guides, Girl Scouts. They would be in the US, but in Australia they were called Girl Guides. And we performed for some women at this nursing home. And they came up to us afterwards. We were singing Christmas carols, I think. I know I'm Jewish, but I love Christmas carols, and I have hung out in organizations that are a little bit fueled by Christian sensibilities or Christian historical backgrounds. Anyway, the elder ladies advised us not to wear high heels, and said that they, in their declining years, declining is a terrible word, they in their golden years were struggling with problems with their feet. And that was like, this is the one piece of advice we want to give you, young girls. Don't wear high heels, wear sensible shoes. And I really took that on board. Yes, Marcia used to sing too. I really remember that, because you've always been very supportive and encouraging of me singing, or me indulging in singing. Frank notes that digging down to why people are tolerant or intolerant is most interesting in a forum like this. On television, it's entirely polar or phobic. Agreed. I think it's a very interesting and necessary issue to dig into. And this morning, my insight was how there's a modern culture of being authentic. So the idea is be really honest with your relationship partners. And previously, perhaps there was more of an emphasis on be pragmatic, and tailor your utterances to what your partner may or may not be able to cope with. And probably the reason for the move away from that culture was because it's often seen as requiring undue sacrifices from the part of women. So women were supposed to subjugate their needs to their husbands. Women were supposed to behave in a transactional way in relationships that involved surrendering to the sexual needs of your husband, regardless of whether or not you were personally enthusiastic about participating in sex acts. And you didn't always say what you meant. You said what was good for the relationship. You said what was needed to be said to preserve a partnership. So since hippies led a movement to be authentic and self-actualized, there's been this idea that conservatives are pro-family and pro-hushing some of your authentic impulses to preserve families and to preserve relationships, and that liberals are against that preservation of the family. And I think that belies the actual goals of the Democratic Party, because you can't falsely conflate the Democratic Party with hippies. That's probably a Republican strategy that was pursued with both hands by Richard Nixon. who wanted the public to embrace continuing war with Vietnam and to deride hippies as being antisocial, anti-family, pro-individuality, and anti-war and pro-gun, pro-drug taking, as opposed to the solid, responsible people who would continue to vote for Nixon and keep him in power. And eventually, there was a lot of strategies that young people employed to try and bring down Nixon as a political force and to thereby oppose American participation, ongoing participation in the killing fields of the Vietnam War. And they would have something called teach-ins, where they would just sit down and talk to people. And if you saw a crowd and were attracted to come and sit down as well, you would hear someone passionate and consequentially persuasive describing the problems with the Vietnam War and how it's creates a self-sustaining feedback loop whereby you get vested interests who are financially incentivized to advocate for a continued presence in a country where there's war. That once you start a war, it's hard to back out of it because some people will be getting lucrative military contracts. John Smith says, I don't like feet, but I love nursing homes. Marsha notes, I had many patients whose relationships suffered under Trump. Yes, I've experienced that personally. There's so much room for healing. And I think there was hope at one point that the Roseanne show would help people work through their Trump instigated family breakdowns. But Trump was too awful for that to be easy. And Roseanne was too loyal to Trump. So she couldn't stop herself from sabotaging that show. And she ended up referencing a Biden advisor, Valerie Jackson? Valerie something. Valerie Jarrett. So she tweeted about Valerie Jarrett and called her an ape, which is a racial slur, or is strongly historically grounded as being a racial slur, and she was subsequently fired from her TV show. They did reconfigure it as a show called The Connors, which was the Roseanne family, but with Roseanne being dead from a drug overdose. So yes, we look to other avenues for popular culture to help people heal those family divisions, but currently they're still there. Maybe we need a new show, or maybe The Connors needs a character who's a QAnon fanatic and needs to be carefully introduced back to reality, because it's a hard thing. And it's a Mark Twain quote that says it's easier to fool people than convince them that they've been fooled. And there's a biblical quote that says, like a dog returneth to his vomit, so does a fool returneth to his folly, which means, yeah, you get involved with foolishness, you're likely to stay there and keep defending yourself as having never done anything wrong in the first place, then you are likely to admit that you've been wrong. And that's the case with QAnon people who, even after Trump has been proven to not secretly be running the White House, and Trump isn't secretly the president and Biden isn't a hologram, rather than admit that they were wrong all along to pursue QAnon, I think some people are still just going further and deeper into holes rather than begin the arduous work of climbing back out. People don't like to go backwards and retrace their steps. Sometimes they'll just go forwards. And some people in the Republican Party are indulging that tendency. So they're helping people go further into the rabbit hole of denying reality and pretending that Biden is somehow evil, pretending that the policies of the Democratic Party are an imposition or anti-capitalist. But I'd say it's hard for them to do that, but it's not. It's easier for them to do that because there's the large appetite of people who don't want to admit that they're wrong and that they were wrong. So there's mucho Republican appetite to hear ridiculous misrepresentations of Joe Biden and to hear ridiculous misrepresentations of the Democrats as being a party that facilitates witchcraft and child sex trafficking. Even as evidence continues to emerge that Republicans, Republican Representative Matt Gaetz, literally trafficked young women over state lines and paid them for sex in concert with his friend, corrupt Seminole tax collector Joel Greenberg, and that Roger Stone was also involved in a push to solicit a pardon from Trump, and that Roger Stone was offered money and may have received money to the tune of $250,000 in via Bitcoin currencies, cryptocurrency. Appetite for folly. I'm just going to write that down. If you guys ever come across, if you chaps, to be less gendered about it, no, chaps is also gendered. If you folks is not gender specific. If you folks ever come across phrases which particularly resonate with you from a New York Times article or anything, feel free to share it, because I collect those things like gold. Yes. So we can either discuss them or you can just give them to me and I will write them down and see what I can do with it, because in trying to motivate myself to complete a blog on a daily basis, I'm thinking I could do something low-key like word of the day, where I could discuss a word of the day and include links to an article, and that could be an easy discipline for me to get into, of putting some resources out there and some intellectual contribution to help the discourse. Because the discourse still needs a lot of help. Yes, America did an amazing thing in a collective sense. America ousted a tyrant from office, even when that tyrant had all the advantages of the bully pulpit, the highest, most prominent podium in the land to lie to the public from, and offer them an alternative reality where COVID wasn't a problem. There would be no lockdowns and no difficult public health impositions because COVID's not real. Just trust Trump and vote for Trump. I'm sure a lot of relatively low information voters voted for Trump because of those very promises, because of their fear that their businesses would be impacted, that their employment would be impacted, and that Trump potentially was the door to this reality where they wouldn't have to suffer to prevent the virus. That if they voted for Trump, then what he said would just manifest itself, that COVID would just go away, that COVID was just a beat up, that they were being lied to, and that all of the negative economic consequences that result from an under-responded to pandemic ravaging the land, that those negative consequences would just all evaporate because Trump would be in charge, and Trump's reassurances would be actualized. So yes, he had that advantage as an unrepentant, inveterate liar. He had the most cameras on him, he commanded so much media attention, and he had this powerful Twitter account to continue to spew disinformation and lies to the American public, as well as a lot of willing co-conspirators in Fox, in OAN, in Newsmax, on conservative radio, who all helped circulate and reinforce the network of lies that he used to pull the wool over the eyes of American voters and just residents. Marsha says, can I direct message you? I read a lot and can come across direct quotes. Absolutely 400%, Marsha, to be mathematically hyperbolic. I would love you to direct message me with great quotes that you find. That's exactly what I'm asking for, and I'm so glad you've put your hand up for that. Are we connected on Twitter? I hope we are. And if not, let's make that happen. John Smith notes he probably would have won re-election if not for COVID. Well, my argument is that COVID helped him in some ways, as well as exposing him in other ways. So COVID and his absolutely murderous level of public health sabotage in response to COVID, that hurt him with more educated people. But it helped him with some desperate, low propensity voters who might not ordinarily be bothered to vote, but who were induced to vote to safeguard their personal financial situation by the promise of Trump that he would not have any lockdowns. Lockdowns really hurt people. And if you have a Republican in power who doesn't evenly distribute government aid, who helps corruptly concentrate government aid amongst Republican-affiliated recipients and successful big business recipients instead of Main Street small businesses, then you are facing a lot of pain, and you might not have the clarity of mind to see who's responsible for that, because Donald Trump is every day lying to your face to tell you that it's Democrats harming your business. It's Democrats making people stay home because of their fear rhetoric about COVID. He claims that it's Democrats hurting your business because Democrats are insisting on lockdowns. He claims it's democratically aligned, or he falsely claims that Dr. Fauci is a Democrat, falsely claims that doctors and researchers and virologists are secret Democrats trying to hurt Americans in order to hurt Trump. And that's a potent argument for people who don't follow the news very closely and who aren't particularly educated about how pandemics work. And that's a lot of people. And if you think about a bell curve and how there's a big blob of people in the middle of education levels by definition, you might understand that there's still a substantial amount of people who would find those lies appealing and convincing. John says people tend to vote for change in difficult times. That's not always true. And certainly during wars, people are more likely to vote for an incumbent because they don't want to rock the boat. Or you don't change horses midstream. I'm sure you've heard that expression. So researchers found that to be true when Ebola was a subject of fear, that people in red states intensified their votes for Republican politicians because they were afraid, and it amplified xenophobic impulses. So it amplified people's tendencies to fear others. And Donald Trump positioned himself as the pro-xenophobia candidate who should be applauded for being brave enough to say travel ban from China, who applauded himself for being brave enough to say travel ban with relation to Europe, even though he lied. It wasn't a travel ban from China. There were many Americans repatriating themselves from China and not being dealt with in a quarantine appropriate way. So Trump facilitated the spread of the virus from China because he brought people over on a plane where there was a mixture of people flying on that plane who were coming from Wuhan, China, and people who hadn't come from China. So he was cross-contaminating people with that policy. And with Europe, when Trump instituted a sudden abrupt ban on traveling to America from Europe, meaning he created bottlenecks of massive crowds of people at airports, creating super spreader events in the middle of an unfolding pandemic situation. So Trump touted his credentials constantly as someone who's brave enough to enforce a border and to promote American safety, whilst actually facilitating the contrary, facilitating the spread of a disease. Okay, so Marsha, is your Twitter account Marsha Garrell? Marsha Garrell. Okay, let's find Marsha on Twitter because that's key. Frank asks, at what point is aid too much aid? I'm pleased you've asked that question in good faith, because I want to point out that Republicans often use that question as a way to induce fear that isn't always based on reason, so that sometimes they use people's tribalistic impulses to say, well, there's problems here first. There's veterans on the street, there's homeless people. How can we possibly help other people? When it's a question of investing in the world. So you are supposed to have the capacity to help everybody within America. It's just sometimes there is lack of political will to help homeless people, and there's lack of political will to use some of that Pentagon budget to strengthen America's most valuable military asset, which is its people. When you don't take appropriate care of returning veterans, you're undermining the amount of money you spend on a military budget, because you need people to operate weapons. It's not just technology, it's people. Garrel Kavanagh. Okay. Thank you so much, Marsha. So yes, so Trump promising to spend less money whilst actually funneling massive payments to, I mean, Shake Shack, I think, gave back the 10 million that was given to them for paycheck protection programs. Those payments were supposed to be for small businesses. So when it came to light that Shake Shack had received 10 million, there was a public outcry. Shake Shack returned the money because it was obviously worth more than $10 million as a debit for negative publicity. So no, that's not too much money. It's very important for an economy to invest in saving small businesses. Otherwise, you're white-anting your own economy. You're undermining people's ability to have jobs, to be employed with small businesses. And when they don't have jobs, they can't spend money. So it's often a Republican plank of philosophy to say we should manage the economy like a household budget, which is not borne out by the truth about economics, which is that government investing money pays off handsomely, and that every dollar invested often returns $3 worth of value for people living in that economy. All right, I'm going to quickly find Marsha just to problem solve with that. Oh, wow, I just have to show you guys something. Nope, not that. I was thinking, why is everybody hating on Frank Luntz so much? Interestingly enough, they're saying he sides with corporations now, and a lot of corporations are now their enemy because they opposed the voter suppressive measures that Republicans introduced in 47 states across the United States. Yeah, so Frank notes that you hemorrhage out at one point. So there should be limiting principles for expenditure, but if you characterize debt as being like a hemorrhage, it's not blood loss, it's investment. So keep reading about that. Actually, it doesn't help when you recommend to people to read, does it? Okay, so thanks for the inspiration, Frank. I will do an economics-centric episode one day in which we talk about, we go into some of the data from economists that supports the idea that it's been self-interested behavior from Republican philosophers and Republican-funded economists to pretend to people that debt is like blood loss. Debt is what a strong country does that is the home to innovation, invention, ingenuity, and entrepreneurship. They borrow money because it's worth it. Like you have relatively low interest rates and you build your country up. That's what America does. And people who pretend that spending is a worrisome thing are forgetting the nature of America. All right, so what I wanted to bring up right now is some pro-Trump conservative person who has a show called the Wayne Dupree Media. He says leaked documents reveal Mike Pence tried to undermine President Trump with Frank Luntz. It's becoming clearer every day what a traitorous snake Pence truly was. Tired of ads, become a premium user today. So that's just so exciting because it shows the difficulty Republicans have at the moment, that they're kind of eating themselves up and still wanting to kill some of their highest profile people. So at the insurrection, you had a lot of people asking to hang Mike Pence and clamoring for Mike Pence to be killed for lack of assistance in helping Trump overthrow democracy and throwing out Biden's legitimate election victory in favor of an illegitimate, tyrannical, fascist Trump second term. So yes, hemorrhaging is not an analogy that I'm going to support, and I'm sure, Frank, that you can see why that is, and we'll talk more about it on another occasion. Liz Cheney has noted that anyone promoting the big lie that the 2020 election was stolen from Trump is poisoning our democratic system. Now, I do support that analogy because it's true. It's very poisonous to democracy to have some people become so detached from reality, to have so many people in power like Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, to have actively voted to throw out Joe Biden's Electoral College win. They voted to throw out the votes of millions of voters, and they won't admit to it, but it's because in states where Trump lost, that's the votes they wanted to overturn. They never wanted to overturn their own election victories that returned them to office. Sean, hello, Sean. Sean asks, what is it called when you aren't loyal to a leader in a political movement again? I don't know. What is it called? Maybe that wasn't a rhetorical question. Liz Cheney apparently also said, we can't embrace the notion that the election is stolen. It's a poison in the bloodstream of our democracy. Oh, there's a video about that. The Republican Accountability Project made one. And then I should go. Republican Accountability Project. Here we go. This is a little video. Now, Chris Cheney is an anti-trans, anti-helping people person whose most political positions I stoutly disavow, but one that I can support is her insistence that people be truthful about the insurrection and truthful about Biden's victory. So we're going to play this short video produced by Republicans who are at least genuinely appalled by the lies facilitated by Trump and his allies. Yeah, John, people tried to oust Liz Cheney before, but they didn't succeed. And the person who tried hardest was Matt Gaetz, and he's the one likely facing criminal indictments. So I don't know that you're correct when you say Liz Cheney is on her way out of the party. There's two potential directions that could take. Okay, here is the video.
Nothing is going to stop Liz Cheney from telling the truth.
But we will not forget what happened on January 6th.
The truth about the election results.
The election wasn't stolen.
The truth about the January 6th attack on the Capitol.
President Trump claimed for months that the election was stolen and then apparently set about to do everything he could to steal it himself.
But snowflake Republicans in Congress can't handle the truth.
You can't handle the truth.
Because it exposes their lies to the American people.
President Trump won this election.
The vote was polluted by illegal ballots.
This election is stolen. The evidence is overwhelming.
Republican, Democrat, or Independent. If you stand for the truth, stand with Liz.
Now the most interesting thing for me there was when there was a quote from Liz Cheney saying he did everything he could to steal it himself. I'm going to see if I can go back to that, find it again.
Stolen. The evidence is overwhelming.
Republican, Democrat, or Independent.
No.
If you stand for the truth,
you can't handle the truth.
Because it exposes their lies to the American people.
President Trump won this election.
The vote was polluted.
The election was stolen and then apparently
the election was
set about to do everything he could to steal it himself.
Okay, and then set about to do everything he could to steal it himself. I would love to see a longer clip of what that was taken from, because that's fairly novel. That level of honesty of calling out not just that Trump lied about who won the election, he was trying to steal it himself. He didn't just, accidentally incite an insurrection. He incited an insurrection to steal an election, to steal a second term. So yes, that was an interesting video. It's produced by Republicans who, I share very little with in terms of policy agreement. But yeah. All right, we'll take that off the screen. Knowledge enjoyed it. And Frank is saying he didn't mean to trigger me. It was just a shorthand for there being a limited supply of money as there is in the body. Oh, I perfectly understand that analogy. And that analogy upholds a truth that I denounce. I denounce that is truthful. I disagree with it. There isn't a limited supply of money. You create money and you create value. And that's why it's a trigger for me, just because it unearths a whole kettle of assumptions that I would challenge. So I in no way mean to be personally critical of you, Frank. I welcome the opportunity to find that analogy and go, oh yes, that's what some decent people believe. So I can challenge it and I can bring things to the table next time I talk to say, let's look at how money works and let's look at how investment works and let's challenge these at a linguistic level and at an evidence level and at an analogy level. So all manner of levels will challenge the idea that, yep, investing in things or investing in fellow Americans is like applying leeches to a medical condition or anything of that nature, that it's applying, it's leaking what is a finite resource. So that idea of finiteness is exactly what I'm challenging. So I thank you so kindly, Frank, for responding to my rant in a accommodating way. I'm very grateful, because my modus operandi or my big picture goals are to always challenge ideas rather than to challenge individuals. I think that is where we find our common ground and we consider what ideas we support and what assumptions we endorse. All right. I think I'm just about ready to go and I'm so hungry. Oh, we'll have a quick look at this letter from Senator Dick Durbin to FBI Director Christopher Wray, who's a holdover from the Trump administration. And some people have made noises about that, i.e. Christopher Wray didn't do necessarily the world's best job of informing people that there was a risk to the Capitol. He didn't oversee a wonderful job of circulating intelligence about that or gathering intelligence about that, formulating the intelligence into reports that were made prominent enough or be insistent enough to Capitol Police officers that they had to prepare. He didn't stand up enough to the pro-Trump forces that were effectively compelling everybody to stand down as much as possible. For example, the Secretary of Defense, the acting Secretary of Defense at the time, Chris Miller, and also General Flynn's brother, who was apparently also in the Pentagon advocating for no weapons to be used and advocating against the deployment of the National Guard. So here is what I have up on screen is Senate Judiciary Chair, Senator Dick Durbin, asking the FBI Director Christopher Wray in a letter why authorities didn't detect the threat from the Proud Boys to the US Capitol on January the 6th. So here's an excerpt from the letter that I'll quickly read. These reports raise further concerns about the FBI's failure to detect and develop intelligence concerning the threat that the Proud Boys and other violent right-wing extremists posed to the Capitol on January the 6th. I understand that the FBI is in the process of responding to my February the 24th letter requesting information concerning the FBI's handling of the domestic terrorism threat, and to a February the 8th, 2021 joint letter from the Judiciary Committee and other committees requesting information about the January the 6th attack. In addition to the requests in these letters, please also address the following. Given the FBI's apparent relationship with the Proud Boys' sources, why did the FBI fail to detect the threat that the Proud Boys and similar militia violent extremists posed to the Capitol on January the 6th? One member of the Proud Boys has indicated in court filings that he regularly informed FBI personnel about Proud Boy activities in Portland, Oregon, to ask for advice on planned marches or demonstrations, i.e. what march routes to take, where to go, where not to go, and that he had similar discussions with the FBI about Proud Boy events in other cities. Did the FBI ask its Proud Boy sources about their plans for January the 6th? If not, why not? Please respond as soon as possible and no later than May the 24th, 2021. I appreciate your prompt attention to this important request. Now that's very fascinating because it shows a backlog of letters that haven't been replied to yet. So he understands they're still in the process of responding to a letter from February the 8th and February the 24th. And it's May. So that's what? March and April. That's 2 months, and they haven't responded to those earlier letters yet. So now they might go, oh, we've got an extra excuse. Dick Durbin has asked us another question, so let's not respond for another few months. It's really sounding like Biden needs to appoint a new FBI director, and I'm sure also that he's concerned to not have the appearance of destabilizing the FBI, which is an important institution to maintain safety in the United States. But yes, if those questions cannot be answered in a satisfactory way, it really does seem as if Christopher Wray is not an asset to the American people and to their safety. If they had informants from the Proud Boys, but they didn't ask them what's happening on January the 6th, it sounds like they're in bed in a too comfortable way with white supremacist militias, such as the Proud Boys, and they're not capable of paying attention to public, open forum, significant threats against the lives of legislators and against American democracy as a whole. Oh, Brett Walker's here from Los Angeles. Hello, Brett. Lovely to see you. Maybe you can answer a question that I have, which is one of my longest audience members from Periscope. He goes by the name of Christopher Lucas, and every time he comments on my broadcast, it always shows up as moderator has hid this comment. And there's never anything controversial about any of the comments. He's always just saying hi or being supportive. There's no swear words or anything. And his handle is very innocuous as well. It's something like cool photo guy. So I always make sure I click on globally unhide his comments, but I would still love to find a way to refresh his credibility with the algorithm, or to restore his HAPS credit rating, or whatever it is that is currently excluding him from participating. So Knowledge is here and knows you too, Brett. He says, hey, Brett. It sounds like Knowledge, you broadcast on this platform as well. You should, or you could consider, if you wanted to, inviting me onto your broadcast sometimes, because I'm happy to spread my wings and chat to other people as well, and to have more of a dialogue than I indulge in here, where I tend to just talk amongst myself. Frank says DAV 2024, which I'm really grateful for. Thanks, Frank. I'll find some low-level political office to run for when I arrive in Boston. And Frank says he's totally with me and appreciates the bringing that up for discussion, whether or not something is finite, such as whether the amount of money that America can invest or the amount of money America can borrow should be a finite, or should be considered to be a finite amount of money or finite resource. So I'm so grateful for your being open to that idea, Frank, of debating that analogy, whether we should conceive of investment as potentially a leak, such as hemorrhaging money, or if there is different alternatives we can run with, such as fertilizing the soil of American civic life and helping people endure misfortune and subsequently flourish and get free education via community college and then have more to give back to their families and their communities. Certainly, I've always argued that about migrants, that they revitalize the American economy and grow it through the spirit of ingenuity and valuing of education and valuing of risk-taking, because the very act of migration itself is an openness to risk, of surrendering a home country or an origin country for a new origin story in a new land in order to pursue the opportunity that America is associated with, because it has a reputation for being friendly to migrants and allowing businesses to flourish. What it doesn't want to have is a reputation for pandering to corporations to the detriment of those who live in America. But of course, the reputation of America as a golden opportunity is hard to undermine in the eyes of people from all over the world who still do look to America as a relative light on the hill of being migrant friendly, of being a multiracial democracy, a functional multiracial democracy. I'm going to write that down. Functional multiracial democracy, because Republicans are sabotaging that reputation a bit. They made America look like a dysfunctional multiracial democracy, a multiracial democracy that hankered after being a white dominant monocultural democracy, where white people like Donald Trump exercise an inordinate amount of influence, even when there is a plethora of evidence that they are corrupt and self-serving and actively acting against the interests of the American people and actively sabotaging public health. So there's some updates here. Knowledge says to Brett that he likes that you guys brought back some of the old features to the newest update. Marsha gave me an Appreciate Award. Thank you, Marsha. And Brett says that we plan to bring back more. Awesome. And Haps gave me a Together Award. Thank you, Brett Walker from Haps team. And Marsha says that is what's so wonderful about America. It does work. And Trump undermined it. Trump negatively impacted it. I'm not going to say Trump ruined it, because it's still there. And Biden is restoring it and helping Americans flourish once more in an atmosphere where they feel as if the best parts of America are respected and preserved and helped. Frank says, thanks for promoting thinking and not just reacting. You rock. Thank you, Frank. And thank you, Marsha, too. I didn't mean to make you feel bad in any way, just that I wanted to clarify that, because it's a personal goal that I have always of tweaking language so that we tweak our own emotional responses, so that we don't, just to keep up the energy and momentum that we have in opposing Trump and the Republican Party, because ruined is such a past tense, finite term. Whereas if we say he negatively impacted it, then that's much more inviting to a goal of restoration. That's only my opinion, and I will keep promoting that opinion because I put some stock in it. But I don't ever want to make other people feel that their opinion is devalued. It's valued. I might just sometimes tweak it a bit or put up a counterpoint. So thank you, Marsha, for being very accommodating of that. Thank you. And thank you very much to Knowledge El Shabazz for the Super Clap Award, which I'm noting there as well. Thank you a lot. I've spoken for nearly 2 hours, so I best go and have some lunch, but I'm grateful for everybody and your contribution and your engagement and your support and I value who you are. I value people for having that interest in finding ways to do things that will maximize the pro-social and utilitarian impact of our votes and our ability to organize and work together as a multiracial democratic society. I hope to join you in the months ahead. I'll be moving to Boston, and then my timelines will be more aligned with yours. And until then, I can keep working on having earlier broadcasts so I don't interfere with your sleep cycles, and so that you can get healthy and stay healthy, because I'm learning more each day about how sleep is an important, or sleep allows for our immune system to help clear our brain of tangles. Apparently, getting relatively less sleep in middle age is a risk factor for developing dementia later on in life. So that's certainly a powerful incentive to try and get adequate amounts of sleep for whatever age you are. And Brett just gave me an appreciate award. Thanks, Brett, and says thanks for the always interesting discussions. Bless your heart, Brett. Thank you, Knowledge, and thank you, Marsha. Frank says, get over here. I'm on it. Christopher's here, and he's still blocked. Any tips, Brett, about what I can do with regards to Christopher? So here I can say, read out what it says. It says, this user has been muted by a moderator, and this comment is only viewable by moderators. So now I'm unhiding it, and I'm going to present it on screen. Oh my God, maybe it was me. I just noted there's the options to unmute it. This is what if I accidentally did this to you, Christopher? Because I just finally paid attention to my options then, and it said, I've been globally unhiding your comments, comment by comment, but it looks like once I muted you, which I assure you I would never have intentionally done and must have been inadvertent. Wow, that was me all along. I've been so worried about how to fix this problem. And I did it. Looks like I did it. If I had the ability to unmute you, then I must have muted you in the first place. Sorry, Christopher. And I solved that problem myself. Gracious. That's been bothering me for weeks. So Brett says, lol. Thank you, Brett. I will make sure I pay more attention to all of my action options next time, because if I'd noticed that I had the option myself to unmute Christopher, then I could have done that a long time ago. So thank you, everybody. Christopher doesn't mind. I mean, we've been in contact over Twitter previously, so we've literally been brainstorming about how to solve this problem, and the answer lay before me all along. Yesterday, I quoted Isaac Newton as saying, let's find the Isaac Newton quote. Something about perceiving oneself as a boy playing with pebbles on the shore, whilst all along. Okay, I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore and diverting myself in now and then finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me. So I've been a bit Isaac Newton-y today. Of course, the man was a genius who worked out the various laws of physics, including the law of gravity. And yes, so Knowledge El Shabazz says, welcome back to Cool Photo. And Frank enjoyed the Isaac Newton quote. I'm glad you did. I'll say take care, everybody. Talk to you soon. And maybe next time I'll prepare a song so that I can include a bit of singing, a bit of entertainment in this pro-democracy variety hour. Cheers, everybody. By Knowledge and Marsha and Frank and Christopher and Brett and said Frank, said Brett, said Marsha. Okay, I think that's everyone. I think that's everyone for today. So cheers. Bye-bye.